So would you bow your heads with me and join in prayer? Gracious, loving, holy God, we give you praise, we give you thanks for creating us, for loving us in all our pain and distress and brokenness. Thank you, Lord, that through Jesus Christ and his death and resurrection, you bring healing, and that through the community of faith and truth-telling and speaking courageously, there is great healing for survivors of all kinds of sexual abuse. Lord, still our hearts to listen well, speak to us, and fill Monica with your Holy Spirit. Thank you for her courage and for her work and for bringing her here to Calvin College tonight. In Jesus Christ's name, amen. And now, programming assistant Rachel Stedman will introduce Monica for us.
Monica Day is the voice for many silent whisperers. A leader, advocate, poet, and victim advocate. As the founder for the nonprofit Stand Up, Speak Out of North Carolina, Monica's personal mission is to speak out and act out against sexual violence and domestic abuse. Monica has earned a Bachelor's of Science in Psychology and Master's of Science in Multidisciplinary Human Service, with a concentration in nonprofit management and leadership. Through Stand Up, Speak Out, founded in 2004, she leads community outreach against the domestic violence and sexual assault and utilizes art therapy to assist people in overcoming trauma. Drawing from her own life journey as a model for therapeutic process, Monica uses poetry, music, journaling, visual arts, drama, and dance to help others, working with both survivors and perpetrators of abuse to end the vicious cycle of domestic violence. Day's journey is a celebration of the power of transformative change and the healing potential of the arts. Please join me in welcoming Monica Day.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you so much for having me here at Calvin College. I am just excited about being here, being able to have this conversation. So first, I just want to honor this space here. I ask God to decrease my spirit and increase his spirit so that I can do what I came here to do. This is ministry for me. Nonprofit and the organization and all of that, but ultimately it's ministry. And in sharing, a part of what I do is hopefully leave you with some hope, some encouragement, and inspire you too to stand up and speak out. We need more voices, and we need more people to utilize their voice, because in our voices we have power. So I'm just ecstatic to be here. It's been great the last couple of days that I've been here. Everybody has been so great and sweet, and the hospitality has been wonderful. So give yourself a round of applause for just being so awesome students and staff. So I come from Raleigh, Durham area. I'm from Durham, North Carolina. That's pretty much my home. And it's there where I have utilized my gifts and talents through spoken word and poetry. So I'm going to share with you tonight some of that spoken word, and hopefully in my spoken word you will see just kind of that pain, the inspiration, and just how I have utilized my poetry to speak out. As mentioned, I'm the founder of Stand Up, Speak Out. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization who has utilized art therapy. We are celebrating 14 years of commitment to the community. And yes, and we'll be celebrating that this month. This organization was a grassroots organization, one-woman movement for a very long time. And 3 years ago in 2015, we became a 501c3 because we saw the need that we needed to actually get our services out and expand it. So for many of those years, I was out here. God gave me the vision to do Stand Up, Speak Out, and I took off running and said, okay, God, whatever you have me to do, I'm gonna do. And when I got the vision, it really was simply, we're gonna raise awareness through spoken word, and I'm just gonna collect personal hygiene items for battered women's shelters, and that's it. And as time passed and I continued to go out into the community, I saw a need. And that need was teens and children who witnessed domestic violence and sexual abuse. And those who witness it have the same risk factors as those who are directly impacted. One of the things that as I began to develop Stand Up, Speak Out, I reflected on my own life. And I realized how there were very limited services available for youth who witness abuse, but also for those who had experienced sexual violence. And one of the things that really, really helped me a lot was poetry, writing, journaling. I went to counseling and all that stuff, and I will get into that a little later, but it was through writing. So what we do at Stand Up, Speak Out is we encourage people to share their stories, to speak out, but to utilize art, whether that's painting, drawing, music, using that as a coping mechanism of finding your voice. Because when you've been through trauma, sometimes you can't articulate what it is that you feel. But through art, there's a transformation that happens. There's an energy exchange when we are able to share our stories through art. So that's who we are. If you have your phones and you are on Twitter and social media, we love to engage with you as we go through this conversation. So you can follow us at SUSONC, share some tweets if you want. To tell you a little bit about the organization, just our programs and services and where we are, I have bolded the ones that are the ones that we're offering now. As I said, we're 3 years in for being a 501c3, so we're still pretty much growing in that aspect. But what we offer is community outreach, professional development, and workshop trainings. We also offer self-defense classes for women and teen girls, which we'll be having one this Saturday coming up. We also offer a summer camp program called Girls Speak Out, and that summer camp program is free for our young girls ages 10 to 18, and in our camp we are empowering girls through art. So they get to come to this free fun camp, but it's about building their confidence and self-esteem. They're engaged in arts and craft, they're engaged in dance. We also have a self-defense instructor that comes to our camp to teach them those techniques of protecting themselves, as well as we engage them in real talk. Internet safety, social media safety, cyberbullying, teen dating violence, and things that our young girls are experiencing. Ultimately, our purpose is to empower them to be their greater selves and to know that they have a support system within Stand Up, Speak Out. We also offer support groups, our Brief Life Sister Circles. We have 7 of them in different pockets in North Carolina. Those support groups are for women. And then we also have a support group for teen girls that we have. We also offer, or last year we launched Operation Speak Out, which happens to be community outreach during the holidays, being able to provide clothes and toys for young people that are less fortunate. And that's something that, you know, sometimes when you're doing ministry work, God will place things in your spirit when there's a need. And that's really how nonprofits are started. You see a need, you see a gap, you fill it. And that's what we have begun to do with Operation Speak Out. And a lot of times it's really centered around those who we're serving. That's who we utilize through Operation Speak Out. Case management, one of the big components with Stand Up, Speak Out is that not only do we want to work with the children, but it's about linking and coordinating services. So if we're working with young people, we also have to work with the families to make sure that they get the support that they need, whether that's job, employment, financial, education, whatever that is. It's about coordinating service, getting them linked to counseling as well. And then some of the programs that we are not offering just yet, but it's a part of what we'll be offering is our mentoring program, which is for survivors of abuse. And so not your typical Big Brothers, Big Sister of America mentoring program, but a mentoring program that is geared for survivors. So having someone who actually has gone through abuse and sexual abuse and being able to help those individuals we serve. And then our Project Speak Out is school-based, which is going into the communities and going into the schools and educating our young people working in the schools, as well as working with our teachers on how to respond and how to recognize and identify young people who are abused. So that's our services and programs that we offer. As mentioned earlier, my background is in multidisciplinary human services, nonprofit management and leadership. I have years of experience working in the mental health, community mental health, where I work with young people who are from low-income families, typically Medicaid funded, and seeking counseling. So I have worked as a case manager for years doing that. Worked in the community with organizations building programs based around young people, building confidence and self-esteem. And I'm not going through all of these different things. I've used evidence-based practices such as strengthening families, Triple P, and ecosystem structural family therapy, which is another form of strengthening families. So different things that I've used throughout the years of doing this work along with my educational background. But regardless of all of the educational background, accolades and certificates and all of those things, what qualifies me today to speak to you is that I'm a survivor of domestic violence and sexual abuse, all of which happened before I was 15 years old. So it's not about, the credentials. I believe that you learn the most from speaking and learning from an expert or a person that has survived that abuse. So our experts are really those who've lived through it, who can talk with you and share with you those real life experiences. Statistics tell us that every 98 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted, and every 8 minutes, that victim is a child. So my story, as I said, I want to get into my story and kind of share that with you. But before I get into sharing and going down the years of the trauma that I experienced, I want to begin with a spoken word piece related to my story. Now, I don't typically do this podium thing because I like to move around. So, if I start walking around or whatever, don't nobody get scared and say, oh, man, she's scary. I also like to laugh and have some humor, too, because when it comes to these topics, they're really heavy, right? So, I like to make sure that everyone's comfortable as well. So one of the things is we are dealing with a heavy topic. So if anyone at any time needs any support or anything like that, please see Miss Julia as well. And then there's also some ushers that are in the back. This topic can be heavy, and I do know that it's also triggering. You can also see me at the end of this conversation as well. So the spoken word piece that I wrote, I'll just go into it. Too distant to be mentioned. Ripped into pieces of family secrets never to be broken. Hoping no after effects will affect her senses, but it did. After 26 years. Hidden tears find their way through the surface. See, she had lost her courage because someone hurt her. Lapse of memory had her taking risk. Lapse of memory had her mind playing tricks, but no, she was starting to remember. The hit. The first time he tried to kiss her and she clenched. At the taste of leftover urine that made her feel like she would vomit. Droplets of premature ejaculation made her hate him. Conversations between God and the devil made her lose her salvation. Devastated that someone who claimed to love her would make her a victim. Close kin, more like cousins, sneaked in while family members sat at the dinner tables reminiscing on the good old days. While children played in back rooms, they say, the little ones are so innocent. So they dropped their overprotectedness. Had older siblings and cousins watch over them while they pretended to be grown up, but someone's a little too grown up. in the game of house. Shh, don't be too loud. Don't ever let this secret come out. And it didn't. Held it in, never to bring it up again. Buried it and swept it in the crease of an abandoned room, never to be resumed. But soon visions would show vivid pictures of little children who would never fully bloom. Confused because their souls have been devoured. And now another innocent child's soul has been devoured. And mama's not paying attention. Too busy listening to the latest gossip coming from the church pulpit that she missed her daughter's cry for her attention. She didn't even know that her child's soul was missing, wishing that mama would come to her rescue. So that child's 911 phone calls never got through. Lines disconnected. We're sorry. The number you called cannot be complete at this time. Please check the number and dial your call again. And again, and again, and again she called, but no one seems to recall the thousands of calls for help, the rebellious behavior, the suicide attempts, the running away from home, the skipping school, the unable to pay attention in school, the multiple sex partners. Did anyone bother to take the time to calculate the signs? No, they just brushed it off. Said this is just a phase that will soon fade away, so they took olive cooking oil, anointed her head, and prayed. But soon after that, they lost their faith. Took her to unfamiliar counselors who thought they could make her break the silence. But she was too far gone now. She was violent, juvenile delinquent, all because her guardian angel, AKA her mother, didn't pay attention. They just didn't believe that someone snatched their precious seed, took her to the 4th floor on an elevator, and robbed her of her virginity, while they were in the same vicinity speaking in tongues, giving God the glory. But no one wants me to remember this story, and no one really wants me to tell this testimony, but I have to, because as you sit and listen to this poem, every second that goes by, a child is left abused, a son is left confused, a daughter is left internally bruised, and a mother is refusing the truth. This could be you. Your child might be screaming right now for you to come to her rescue. Don't disconnect it. Don't press ignore on your cell phones, because your voice and your presence might just be their savior. As I said, a lot of the abuse that I experienced, it happened before I was even 15 years old. And when you look at me, you may ask the question, how? How did you experience abuse at such a young age like that? My first domestic violence relationship, I was 13. And you may look, and we always pass judgment. We're like, oh, well, she's a black woman, so, statistic tells us African-American people typically are at higher risk of being sexually abused. Or perhaps she grew up in a single-parent home, poverty-stricken, high-crime environment, exposed to drugs, daddy in and out of her life, all the different things that may come to mind. The reality is, I grew up in a 2-parent home. My mother, an evangelist, my father, a deacon. I have always grown up in church, middle class, taught Christian morals and values. I promise you, I went to church every time the church doors was open. No, all the time the church doors was open. Whether it was Monday, we had something. Tuesday, there was something happening. Wednesday was probably Bible study. And Thursday was probably choir rehearsal or some other service that was happening. Friday, I was in church again. And Saturday, there was probably some youth program happening. And on Sunday, I was in church all day long. I grew up in a Pentecostal church. They believed in staying in church all day. Like from 8 o'clock in the morning, we had Sunday school, and then we have church service, and then we have another service, and they feed you too so that you don't go home, and then we have more service. So I was in church all the time. I knew the scriptures and all of that stuff. I was never exposed to my parents drinking or using drugs. I'm actually a daddy's girl, apparently, as you can see. That's me right there, a little girl all on her dad. Never heard my parents curse or swear, never said any of those things, and I grew up in a pretty diverse neighborhood. In fact, we were the only 2 black families, my aunt that lived next door and our family. And so statistically, it's like, wow, how did this happen? This is just some updated pictures of my family, because I gave you that old picture. But pre-abuse, I was a typical child, AB student, made friends easily, pretty much social butterfly, loved playing with baby dolls. I told the students earlier in the class that I was in that I played with Cabbage Patch Kids. Now, you guys some of the students might be a little young to know about Cabbage Patch Kids. Who remembers Cabbage Patch Kids? All right! So that was my favorite little baby doll. I love playing with the Cabbage Patch Kids. I used to think I was going to be a cosmetologist, so like I would cut up, and if you know about Cabbage Patch Kids, they have that yarn hair, so I would cut it up and braid it up and think, oh, I'm going to hook my baby up and have it looking good. So I love playing with my baby dolls. Watching cartoons, Scooby-Doo, again, another old school cartoon. Love looking at Scooby-Doo and riding my bike, doing kid stuff with a great imagination. I used to imagine that I was going to be a teacher one day and had my little chalkboard in my room and teaching my baby dolls every day. So great imagination, no issues whatsoever. However, as time went on, and I experienced the abuse, that child completely changed. At 11, because we went to church all the time, I attended, we also visited churches too. And I attended a church convention in downtown Durham, pretty major church convention. And at this church convention, they have a lot of different vendors and people that come in, typically over thousands of people that come to this convention. I attended this church convention, and after being in the church for a while, it wasn't uncommon, when we go to church where, I've already told you, we're there all day long. This particular time in 1992, and I attended this church convention with my mom, one of the missionaries of the church, and their daughter. And she was a couple of years older than me. So after sitting in church for a while, we asked if we could walk out to the restroom and just kind of, stretch our feet, stretch our legs. And so why would my mom feel any way about allowing us to go out there? We're right here, the bathroom was there. My mom was not thinking anything terrible would happen. We're in God's house. We're in this church setting with good Christian folks. So we go to the restroom and decided to just kind of walk around not far from where the lobby was of the church. And I decided to go sit down by a bench that was near the elevator. And I could kind of hear people coming on and off the elevator, still within eyesight of the young lady that I was with. She was looking at vendor stuff. And the next thing I remember is, in my own little girl mind, I'm just sitting there, not really paying attention to all the things around me or the people around me. But a few minutes after sitting there, I remember hearing the elevator door open, and I was grabbed and taken on the elevator and whispered in my ear, "Do what I tell you to do, and you won't get hurt." I didn't really see the guy in the beginning until we got to the 4th floor. And he took me to the 4th floor in an open stairwell, and he raped me. What didn't last, I don't know, just a few minutes, was a lifetime for me. I remember being in that space and just wanting somebody to come, walk in, rescue me, and I didn't want him to hurt me. The church is supposed to be a sacred place. It's a place where we come to feel safe. It's a safe haven. But it's in that safe haven and that safe place that my purity and my innocence was stolen. I would never get that little girl who loved playing with Cabbage Patch Kids, riding her bike, teaching, doing all that fun stuff. That little girl was gone. He stripped her innocence and purity, and she would never quite smile again like that. When it was over, he got up, went on about his business, charges was filed, rape kit done, all of the stuff that happens. But I was never the same. I never got that little girl. That little girl never came back. So the little girl my parents knew completely had turned into someone else. The post-abuse, I became defiant, aggressive, running away from home, getting suspended from school. I grew up in a Christian home. Cursing wasn't something we did, but I was cursing teachers out, students out, fighting. My grades went from A's to B's to D's and F's, hanging with the wrong crowd. And one thing that I tell people a lot is that when you've been sexually abused, two things happen. You will shut down sexually, or you may become promiscuous. And that's exactly what happened to me. I was in my first abusive relationship at 13. No one was coming to our church talking about domestic violence. No one was coming to the church talking about sexual abuse or any of those things. You didn't talk about that. And if women then was being abused, it wasn't a conversation that was publicly talked about. It was silent. It kept quiet. So I was in my first abusive relationship at 13, after running away from home, getting with a guy who was a couple of years older than me. I was looking for love, safety, protection, and in all the wrong places. And I'm a young girl who's been victimized and now completely different child. And I'm hurting and I'm trying to fill a void. And this relationship, he was verbally, mentally, sexually, and physically abusive. Been choked till I passed out. One time he choked me. I was skipping school to hang out with him, and we went to a park, and I remember he got upset because when he picked me up for me to skip school, there was a guy that opened the door for me, just being a gentleman. And he got upset, and when I got in the car, smacked me 2, 3, 4 times, and we got to the park, and he choked me till I passed out. And I just remember him fussing and arguing, but then when I woke up, I had a cup in my hand, and I just remember waking up to him just patting me on the face, Monica, Monica, Monica. So I had passed out, and I don't really know how long I was out, but I had passed out. He was abusive in a lot of different ways, humiliating me, all types of things. Now, during this time, there were very limited resources. And you may ask, well, where were your parents? What were they doing? Here, you're out of control. What were they doing? Everything that a parent could do. They were seeking resources. They were very limited. We had counseling, we had church, and we had mentors. A mentor was not equipped to deal with the type of trauma I had experienced. And besides, the way I was acting at that time, I probably wasn't even home enough to even meet up with the mentor. But my parents signed me up, big brother, big sister, to get a mentor and see if that would help. They signed me up with counseling. Counseling, it was with a male counselor. Well, why would I want to talk to you? So I sat in therapy week after week. He was looking at me, I was looking at him, because I didn't want to talk, and I refused to talk. I guess also my parents was doing what they knew to do. That was to pray. Pray, 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 get more people in the church to pray for. That's what they were doing, because that's the limitations of resources. That's just pretty much what they had then. My dad actually kept looking for support from anywhere. And he even checked with the juvenile services. And they told him that, we really can't do anything. I mean, you could take out statutory rape on this guy and we'll keep looking for him, but if she keeps running away with him, we'll keep looking for him and we'll arrest him, but it's really not a whole lot we can do with her until she gets in trouble with the law. Well, what do you think happened? I got in trouble with the law. Down the wrong path, destruction, defiant behavior. By now, I'm 15. I have dealt with sexual abuse. My grades are felon, and now I've dealt with physical abuse and sexual abuse times 2, because we call it what it is. When sex is unwanted, it's rape, it's sexual assault. And he sexually assaulted me several times, even though this was someone that I knew. Understand that a lot of times when a person is sexually assaulted, it's very rare that it's a stranger. Very rare that it's a stranger. The guy that I was in this abusive relationship with, he was eventually arrested on unrelated charges. He was into criminal and illegal stuff, selling drugs and things like that, and he was arrested for that. And that was my freedom back home. But again, I have now dealt with all of this stuff, and I got anger. I'm dealing with depression and anxiety. I'm dealing with a mixture. I'm just a mixture of unmanaged emotions ready to explode at any given moment. And hurt people hurt other people. And in many cases, sometimes abused people will abuse other people. And so this untreated person, and I tell people that there's a thin line between a victim and an abuser. And a lot of the abusers have been abused at some point in their life. Doesn't mean that if they sexually abuse someone or if they were sexually abused, that they're going to sexually abuse someone else. They may be verbally abusive or physically abusive. But there's that thin line. And so here I am, 15 years old, dealing with all of this stuff, and now I'm full of rage and anger, and I'm taking that out on someone else. Set up a fight that was supposed to just be a quick, I'm going to beat up this girl because she's talking about me, and just girl drama, nothing serious. And this fight ended up being torture for this young girl. Very simple fight, but it ended up being torture for this young girl. Everything that first abuser had done to me, the physical abuse, the verbal abuse, the emotional, the humiliation, I was doing the same thing to this young girl. Myself, along with 3 other girls. Out of all of them, though, I was the only one that was sent away. And when I look at it, it really was a blessing in disguise, because my life was going down the wrong path. And had it, anything happened, just a year later, I would have been in the big house and prison, because my life was just really going down that path. I was sent to the juvenile detention facility in Swannanoa, which is in the mountains, Black Mountain, Asheville area. I was there for about 20 months. Where I was able to get into a treatment program, which was for people who had experienced sexual trauma. And then also, I was in a group setting as well for people who had experienced different types of adverse childhood experiences. I was there for 20 months. It was there that I started writing poetry. So I started writing poetry after the death of my grandmother, but it was just right here and right there. But it was here where I didn't have mom, I didn't have daddy, I'm just here in this place. It was there that I began to write poems. And those poems was, in the beginning, they were really just letters to God, really trying to seek answers. Because I had given up pretty much, in a sense, on God. And so my letters was, God, where were you? These poems and these letters to God were, where were you? Why didn't you help me? Why wasn't you there? And I would later learn and rebuild my relationship with God, but for a long time, I had a lot of questions and no answers. And that's what a lot of my poems kind of stemmed around. Was there for 20 months. Got out, I was about 17. And when I got out, here I am like, okay, I have gone through treatment. I have done my time, rehabilitated, right? On my way to finish high school and live my life. The past is behind me. But here I am in another abusive relationship. Months after I got out, I'm back into another abusive relationship because all I knew at this point was abuse. So I'm 17, and I met a guy who I thought was great because they always seemed charming in the beginning, you know? And I wasn't looking for a relationship. I'd just gotten home, so I wanted to just focus on school. Met this young man, and almost immediately looking back, the abuse, the jealousy, the red flags was there. But my mind was a 17-year-old who had experienced abuse. And I think at that time, I attracted that to me. I didn't know my worth. So I accepted any and everything. If it seemed like he would protect me and make me feel safe, I accepted that. And so in this second abusive relationship, he was verbally abusive, emotionally abusive, and physically abusive. From this relationship, I had a daughter. So at 18, I'm a teen mom. And I grew up in a two-parent home, so more than anything, I wanted to have my child in a two-parent home. So I did whatever it took to try to make this work. Because I just wanted, more than anything, I want to raise my child with two parents. It's already, going to be hard enough being a teen mom. But more than anything, I don't want to do this by myself. But he was abusive. And I dealt with that abuse for 7 years. And for a good portion of that time, raised my daughter in that abuse. And my daughter is actually here with me tonight, and my assistant, and she has been my saving grace. Out of the mouths of babes, I didn't know my worth. I knew I didn't want her to witness abuse, and she was really that saving grace for me because I wanted to raise her in this two-parent home, but I knew raising her in a two-parent home that was abusive was not okay. Even in this relationship, because I was still trying to make it work, still trying to do whatever, so we'll get married, right? We'll get married, and everything will work out. We'll have this great life together. We'll get married. Things will change. Because when you're in that relationship, when you're in an abusive relationship, you're constantly thinking that it's your fault. So something you can do about yourself, you can change. So we'll get married. I'll, do whatever I have to do, work, go to school, whatever I need to do to make this work. Nothing ever worked. And the only thing that I had and any courage that I had was my daughter. I couldn't let her grow up in this type of environment. So one day after a fight with her father, she came to the bathroom. It's in the bathroom crying, and a lot of times I would try to hide it. But kids know. They see and they hear, even when we think they don't. And she just said, and like I said, out of the mouths of babes, she said, "Mama, why don't you just leave? We'll be okay." And I don't know why, coming from her, this was like, voila, like a light bulb. Yes, Monica, you got to figure out how to leave. And it would take some time from that moment before I would leave. I went through the different cycles, the abuse, the physical abuse and emotional abuse. the making up. He would apologize. He would say things are going to get better. He would bring gifts. And, you forgive. You forgive. Because, again, all I wanted was a 2-parent home, happily ever after, no abuse. And he promised that he would change. And I was hopeful that that would happen. The calm kind of happens. The abuser often acts like nothing happened. There's no abuse. And no abuse may not be happening for a while. Everything will be good. We're getting along. Everything is great. And then eventually that tension starts building again. Something happens, loses a job, whatever the case may be. And before you know it, the cycle comes back. And he hits you again, or he smacks you again, or whatever. And I went through that cycle till eventually I decided, for her sake, for my daughter, that I had to leave. And so I started reaching out to some of my friends. Some of my girlfriends knew. I would try to hide it, but they knew. My parents knew. And they were trying to, you need to leave, you need to get out of this. But when you're in that, you don't always listen. A victim of abuse, typically it takes 7 to 9 times before they actually permanently leave. And that was also my story. So I would leave, come back, leave, come back, leave, come back, till eventually I was like, once I was able to kind of build my support system and have that support around me, I realized that I actually could leave. I was able to get out of that abusive relationship, divorce him after a few years of separating from him, but was eventually able to get out of that situation and had some support from some of my girlfriends who convinced me to use my gift, to go out into the community and to share my poems. I'm a broken young girl, low self-esteem, low confidence, not feeling very pretty, overweight, all the above, because he had told me nobody else will want me. He told me that, nobody wants you, you're no good, you won't amount to anything, all those different things. And when you hear that over and over and over again, you begin to believe it. So I did. I believed that I wasn't good for anything. And my girlfriend convinced me to go to this open mic. And I did. And when I went to this open mic, I shared a poem that was called 3 Years. And that poem was about the abuse that I had experienced. And that night, so many women came up to me when I finished that poem. Now, I was nervous as I don't know what, but I did the poem. And when I was done, it was almost like I could say, whew, it was a release. And so many women came up to me, please don't ever stop sharing. That's my story. Thank you for sharing that. And for the first time, I realized that, you know what? I'm not alone. And I'm not the only one who has experienced this. It was something that kind of ignited in me that night, and it began my journey of sharing. I say poetry is my healing medicine. It's my psychiatrist, it's my psychologist, it's my therapist, whatever you want to call it. It has been the healing for me. I can't put it into words, really, even though I should be able to because I'm a poet, but it's something about sharing your story and having the courage to be brave to share that story. And so I began to share there, and then from there I was inspired on my healing journey to write a book. That book is called And You Thought You Had Problems, Well, This Is My Life. And it's a book of poems, yes, of my journey, of what I experienced, from the sexual abuse to going to juvie to the second abusive relationship. Everything I experienced was a lot of those poems I wrote in juvie, but also there were inspirational poems of my letters to God, kind of trying to make sense of what I had experienced. So I published that book in 2004, and I didn't really set out to be like a public speaker or to do this, but I wrote this book as my own way of healing, kind of accomplishing something, because someone had told me I would never amount to anything, told me that I was no good, that I wasn't good for anything. So this was kind of like, I've accomplished something for myself. And so I wrote this book in 2004, December of 2004, it was released, had my book signing, and all these people then wanted me to come to their churches, to their schools. Can you come share your story here? Can you come share your story there? And I'm like, okay, so the doors just kind of opened from there, and I began to go out, and really at this time was just sharing poetry, and sharing my story through poetry. And I just began to share, and more doors began to open, and it was through my journey of sharing my poems that I began to really start observing what I had experienced, what I had gone through, what resources were available in the community, like support groups and things. And what I noticed was that there were a lot of support for women, but a lot of what I experienced happened when I was a child. And there were limited resources. My parents didn't have these different resources available other than counseling, mentor, church. That's pretty much it. So I started Stand Up, Speak Out. And like I said earlier, it wasn't supposed to be this nonprofit. It was supposed to be just kind of a movement to get people to speak out. So long before the hashtag #MeToo, I was trying to encourage people to speak out. This is what it is. Use your art, use your creativity to speak out and to share your stories. Use that art, whether it's dance, movement, poetry, whatever. Use that to speak out and share your stories, because through our stories, there's power. We have the power to help other individuals. Hopefully, something I'm saying tonight is helping somebody. So through our stories, you never know what you may share that may be able to inspire, encourage, or even just help someone to live another day. So I began to share my story and go out, and I saw that there was a need. And again, when there's a need, we try to fill the gap. There wasn't a lot of resources for teen victims, so Stand Up, Speak Out was birthed. And I began to develop this organization based around just sharing and speaking and using art as the component. So I was able to, as I said, get out of that relationship, move forward, and a part of my healing journey truly was speaking. When I share my story, it was a part of my own healing journey. I didn't realize that in the beginning. I was just going out to share. Wherever someone wanted me to come, I would share. But as I was sharing, it was like each wound, each scar that I experienced, I was beginning to heal. See, the physical scars eventually go away. The black eye, the scars on my body, the bruises. But the invisible scars, they can last a lifetime. And it's those scars that through poetry and through art, I've worked to heal. What I want to share with you as I prepare to kind of ease into how we can help victims become survivors is I want to share with you what that aftermath looks like when you are a victim of trauma and abuse. So in coming up with these different 5 phases, it's centered around a lot of what I experienced, but also just in my observation of the people that I have worked with as well. So the 5 phases of trauma and abuse is the first phase, and these phases, just so you understand, they can happen immediately after sexual abuse, or they can happen at different times in an individual's life. They don't happen in these steps that I'm going to share with you. They can happen at any time, but they can also happen at the same time, more than one phase. So phase 1 is suppression isolating yourself, not wanting to talk, wanting to forget that it happened. During this phase, you go through the self-blaming, self-shaming, the guilt. A person may experience different forms of guilt. If it happened in church, you may be afraid to tell someone. If it was a pastor who did this to you, and a popular pastor or whoever the case may be, you may not want to say anything that happened. So depending on what it was, if it was a uncle, family member, whatever. So they go through those different phases where it's guilt and shame and rather not talk about it at all. And one thing that we do as humans when trauma happens or anything happens that is bad, we don't want to deal with it. We don't want to talk about it. And when you're a young person, very much so, you don't want to keep repeating it. You just want to forget that it ever happened, get back to life as normal. And so we suppress. But one thing is, I believe in a part of our healing journey, in order to truly heal, we have to deal with the core of the issue. And anything that you suppress, put in the back of your mind, it will come back. It will come back. And it may come back when life is good, you finish school, you have that great job, great career, that awesome husband or awesome wife, and everything is great. And then here comes the trust issues. Here comes the flashbacks and dreams and different things like that. So the second phase is the inability to set sexual boundaries and sexual withdrawal. And as I mentioned earlier, even in my own story, I didn't mean for that to happen. Even in my own story, you heard me say how, there's that line where for a long time, I didn't want to do anything. I was mute. I didn't want to get out the house. I was isolated. But the other thing was I became very promiscuous. Survivors, when they've experienced rape, it may be their first experience of any type of sexual encounter. And as a result, they may struggle with safe sex and boundaries, consensual relationships, and a lot of times they get in a space where they are afraid to say no. So when they get in situations where someone is trying to pressure them into sex and things like that, because of sexual trauma, they may be afraid to say no and set those boundaries. In addition to that, they may become very promiscuous as well. There was a young girl that I actually worked with, and she was very promiscuous, had dealt with trauma. She was sexually abused by her stepfather, and she just went into a lot of risky sexual behaviors, where every time she was presented with someone trying to pressure her into sex or whatever the case may be, or a guy trying to come on to her, she just gave in. And she would not say no because she felt like she had to, because if she said no, they would just take it. They would just rape her. So a lot of times after a person has experienced that type of trauma, they do go through that. Sexual withdrawal is another one. And disassociation. So for some victims, they completely withdraw from any type of sexual encounter, any type of even, sexual, social encounter, interactions as well. So while another form of disassociation is sexual disassociation, a lot of people just kind of, they may have a partner that they are intimate with, but they are completely shut down. So they're really not there even in the midst of the intimacy. So that's sexual disassociation. Flashbacks, phase 3 is the flashbacks and dreams. So with my own story, I have, the dreams didn't come until I was like 25, 26. I'm past the abuse, I'm out of the situation, I'm trying to live my life, going back to school, getting life in order, not in a relationship at this particular time. And I started having these flashbacks, and even phobias began to develop. Phobias of getting on like an elevator, and just feeling like the elevator is like closing in on me. started having these flashbacks where I'm being attacked, or I could see reliving that abuse all over again. Now, mind you, it's years at this point, but all of a sudden I'm starting to have these flashbacks. And even the dreams begin to come. And they came very later on after the abuse. So again, these different phases can happen at any time, many years even after you have experienced that trauma. Because again, what we suppress will come back. And if we, a lot of times you may be in counseling and may be dealing or trying to deal with it, but it can come back at any time. Certain things can even trigger you. So you might see the person at a family reunion, if it was a family member that did it. You might see them at a family reunion, and just seeing that person could trigger the abuse. You might see or trigger that memory. Maybe you haven't gone to church in a while and you decide to give your life back to Christ, and you're going back to church, and just the experience, if the abuse happened in church, just going back to church can even be triggering for you as well. So a lot of different things can become a trigger and cause those flashbacks to happen. When the flashbacks happened for me, counseling was kind of something that I decided to go back to because it was really overwhelming, as well as I started utilizing support groups and just being around other people. So for me, counseling was a good component for me, but the support groups was even better because it was helpful for me to be around individuals who really identified with what I was experiencing and what I was going through. Mental illness. That can come at any time. It can come immediately with depression, anxiety, PTSD, or it can come many years later. A lot of times you see the mental illness. For me, it came really early on. I was suicidal pretty early on. Tried to commit suicide a few times when I was young, taking pills. Obviously, God didn't want me to go away from here because each and every time I just had to get my stomach pumped, and that's the worst. So I dealt with a lot of depression, anxiety, the low self-esteem, and all of those things. And even in my adult life, I found that I was dealing with depression even still. And it would come in episodes. And so a lot of times I had to learn, one, what was triggering. I had to do a lot of self-reflecting, self-analyzing to figure out why is this happening? What's triggering this? What's happening in my life? What haven't I dealt with? Because again, like everyone else, I suppressed a lot of things. Didn't want to deal with it. And again, what you suppress, it will come back. So the last phase is reliving the abuse through healthy relationships. So as I mentioned earlier, you can, when you get into that healthy relationship, you may start experiencing some of these phases. I experienced a phase when I met the love of my life, where we've been together now for 10 years. But here I am, finally found someone who loves me and cares for me and is just a great person. And all of a sudden, here I am going through all of these different phases, especially phase 4 and phase 3. And I'm in this healthy relationship, and I'm like, of all times, why couldn't any of this stuff happen when I was, alone and single? Why now? And it takes a pretty special person to be able to deal with a woman who has experienced trauma. So he's been wonderful in that process of just kind of learning and understanding about what it's like to deal with or be with someone who has experienced sexual trauma, but also how he can even help through the process of dealing with mental illness and depression and those episodes of depression that come later on in life. Again, when you suppress certain things and you don't deal, they will come, even down to the trust issues. He'd never really done anything to cause me to have any form of trust issues. But again, trauma comes back, and here I am dealing with all types of, well, everyone in my life at this point has hurt me, so why wouldn't I think you're going to do the same thing, you know? And so, again, these phases happen at different times, so it's really important, and I'm going to get into that, things to do and remember and healing mechanisms, but it's really important to not suppress. Again, I want to just say, in order to truly heal, you got to get to that core of what you're experiencing, why you're experiencing, what's triggering it, and what you can do to overcome. So, 7 things to remember when helping a victim. These things are really important. 1, you have to believe them. I don't care when a person comes to you and shares their story. If it's just happened, or it happened 10 years ago, or it happened 30 or 40 years ago. Your job is not to judge, but to believe them. Because you don't know what it took for that person to finally share their story. You might be the first person they've come to, or you might be the 10th person they've come to. And all they need is for someone to believe them. So your job is not to judge, but to believe their story and to try to push them in the right direction to get the help and support that they need. The second thing is you don't judge or blame, as I said. Being mindful of this, because a lot of times people have already been judged. They've already self-judged and self-blamed and all of that, all the things they've took themselves through. So be very mindful of how you approach and what you say. The best thing that you can do is listen. Be mindful of your own body language, because body language speaks. So depending on how you are interacting with them, how you're looking at them, or any of that, that plays a big role in how they feel, because they're already, a lot of times already nervous about sharing with someone. So it's really important to be mindful of your body language and your words. So I always say that it's really important for people to first say, when someone tells you their story, don't do a lot of asking questions. Listen. And then say, thank you for trusting me with your story. Thank you. And then let them know, I believe you. I believe you. Because more than anything, again, you don't know if you're the first person or if you are the 10th person they've come to tell their story to. And people have just bypassed, well, that happened 20 years ago. You ain't over it yet? And trust me, that is a real statement that has been said to individuals. Be consciously sensitive is number 3. Being consciously sensitive of what you say. Again, being aware of your body language, what you say, how you say it. If you're a religious person, when someone comes to you about their trauma, now is not the time to quote Psalms and Deuteronomy and all these different scriptures. Now is not the time. Do that later. Now is not the time for you to come with this long, drawn-out prayer, because sometimes a victim doesn't want to hear the prayer. Now, they might need prayer, so you can secretly go and pray for them or privately pray. God hears it all, so you can be praying while you're talking. But do not come and start praying and laying hands and oil and all that stuff, because a lot of times, especially depending on if it happened in church, the last thing they really want or hear from is God. Like me, I wanted to know, God, where were you at? Where were you? Why did you allow this to happen to me? Aren't you my protector? Why did you allow it to happen to me? So prayer and scripture is not always the thing that we need to do when it comes to working with abusers. And then if you do want to pray, it's okay to ask for permission. Is it okay for me to pray with you? Is it okay for us to pray? And then even still, and with that, control your own emotions. Sometimes it's easy for us to say, You know what, they were abused. I want to get them, I want to do this, I want to do that, or whatever, especially if you go like to your big brother and they're like, what, something happened? Who did this? They might be ready to go, and cause more violence. More violence is not going to solve the problem. So being mindful of controlling your own emotions and things that you say to them as well. Be aware is the next thing. And this is centered around different people in different roles. So if you are a teacher, being aware of children in your class, what behaviors they are exhibiting, and this is for any future teachers as well, being aware of any behaviors they're exhibiting. Not every child that you see just has ADHD. There may be an underlying reason why that child is acting out and acting the way that they do. Remember my story. I was an AB student. All of a sudden, I was that little girl that was acting out in school. There was an underlying reason for my behaviors. So being mindful of that. Pastors, be aware that although you may be called by God, this is a part of your mission work. This is what you've been called to do. You are a man and woman of the cloth. But if you are not professionally trained in counseling, mental health, and licensed, do not give unprofessional, unlicensed counseling. It is very important because you can cause more destruction and more victimization by what you say to them, providing unlicensed training and counseling to a victim. So please, the best thing that you can do as a pastor, a minister, missionary, whatever your role is in the church, if someone comes to you, the best thing you can do is link them to a professional counselor. So if you have a church, one of the things is making sure you're partnered with a professional counselor. You can still pray for that individual when they give you permission or secretly, but do not provide your own counseling because it can be very detrimental to their healing process and can even re-victimize them as well. Mental health providers or those who are aspiring to be mental health providers, be aware that you may have to ask those tough questions. If you see something and you feel something in your spirit, in your gut, ask the tough questions, what you see. Don't be afraid to ask those tough questions. You witness and you see something that looks like it might be some form of abuse. You are responsible to ask. You're accountable to ask those questions. Encourage, reassure, and be patient. Really important. They need to know it's not their fault. It's not their fault. If you have been abused, it's not your fault. That's really important that individuals know because, like I said, there's a lot of anxiety and fear and feelings of guilt, and they're dealing with a lot. So it's really important for you to reassure them, encourage them, and be patient. It takes a lot to come forward and finally share your story. A side note, I just want you to know that survivors don't just forget. And I've heard people say to survivors, well, that happened a long time ago. Just, forget it, move on. The recovery is a long journey. The healing process, a very long journey. So, again, just going back to being mindful. Embrace them with love and support more than anything. That's what they need. They need to know that they're supported, that someone cares about what happened to them, and that you're genuine. People can tell. People can tell if you're not genuine. They can tell. Stay consistent. And even if you're planning to help, follow through. Don't just leave them out there because they may go back into that shell. They may go back into their shell and not continue forward with their journey. And last, establish safety with resources. You never know when you're in a situation where someone may come to you. And this is even with you students. You never know when someone may come to you and say, this happened. I think it's always a good rule of thumb to know what your resources are in your own community. Where is the women's shelter? Where is, sexual assault resources? Where is the support that you can get even here on campus? So just knowing that so that you can be quick to be able to provide that resource and link and being a support for that individual. the road to healing. And this is just what has helped in my own healing journey. And I just kind of laid it out there, and it's not necessarily in this order, but these are the things that have been very beneficial to me: meditation, prayer, exercise, writing poetry. Nature journaling is something that I did during my later years of healing work, and that was really going out into to the water, to a park, a nice place where there's beautiful scenery, and just taking my journal and not thinking about what I'm writing, but just listening to spirit and just writing and releasing. And so nature journaling was real powerful for me, because a lot of times I would get a lot of different messages related to my own healing journey, prayers to God, different things like that. So that was something that's real powerful. Affirmations, creating affirmations has been really powerful for me as well. Simply just saying, today I will live in my purpose, on purpose. Saying different things to yourself. I'm a survivor, and I will walk into my healing journey. Finding different affirmations that speak to your life and speaking life into you. Support groups, as I said, counseling. I'm a supporter of counseling services, one-on-one therapy, but one of the things that's been really beneficial for me: support groups, being in a setting with other individuals who share and understand what I have experienced. And then the other thing is, if you do counseling and one-on-one therapy, I really suggest you, and sometimes it's hard, but finding someone that really can identify with what you have experienced. And sometimes you don't know those things, but for me, it's more helpful to be in a setting of support groups where people kind of can identify that pain and depression and the aftermath and all those different things than kind of just working with someone one-on-one who is just able to give me some interventions and coping skills and things like that. Support groups were more beneficial for me. Art therapy, movement, and dance. There's a lot of trauma that stays in the body when you've experienced trauma. So movement and yoga and meditation, all of those things, holistic approaches are all beneficial and were beneficial to me. And then this may not be everybody's story, because it is hard to share your story. It is hard to share it publicly. But for me, being transparent and sharing my story has been very healing for me. That's not everyone's story. But for me, that has been my road to healing and has been very beneficial. As I said earlier, I have helped to heal other people as I shared my story in poetry, but also it's been very beneficial for my own healing journey. In closing, I just want to say, being a victim is like being a slave in captivity. And one of the things that happens when we share our story, it's like we begin to take those chains out, take those chains off, breaking through, becoming free, letting go of the past and being able to walk into this freedom. And it's almost like, I say when you are able to share your story, you break the chains. When I told for the first time I was raped, this happened to me, it was a freeing. And even though I shared it through poetry, it was a freeing for me. When one person is brave enough to come forward, it's like we ignite this fire. It's like we ignite a flame, and we're holding these flaming torches high. And each time someone tells their story, it builds the momentum, it builds the power. And with that power, our society is now shifting. Our society is shifting. This is not the days of old, guys. This isn't the days of old anymore, where women were kept silent, where we did not speak up. This is a new day now. And this new day, we are rewriting our stories. We're coming forth with bravery and with confidence and with certainty that our voices truly will be heard. What we're doing now is shifting the narrative. And we're saying that we will speak out. You will not keep us silent. We will tell our stories, and we will tell it boldly, and we'll tell it everywhere that we go. And that, when we begin to do that, we are changing the narrative completely. And we are speaking life into those who are hurting. We will no longer be silent. We will no longer be silent. We will speak out. We will share our stories, and we will do it with boldness, with confidence, and with God on our side. I want to say thank you for having me here with you. I hope that I've said something that's been inspirational to you, that's left you with hope. But more so, what I hope to do every time I speak is encourage another person to come forward and speak out. I hope what I do is say, you know what, I have a voice. I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to speak out on my campus. I'm going to start mobilizing on my campus. I'm going to do something about this. So I just want to say thank you for just having me in this space. As we close, there are ways that you can support the organization. We have a lot of different programs, and the book and stuff is outside at the table. But if you are Amazon shoppers, I want to share with you just some different ways that you can support Stand Up, Speak Out in the Arts. If you're Amazon shoppers, guess what? You can support our organization. If you want to join us and partner with us and find out how to utilize art on your own campuses, that's also something that we want to do as well with you. So I will gladly make sure you have that conversation with me as well. We also you can support us through joining us as a monthly donor. We are very new, 3 years of being a nonprofit, and support is needed. So if you want to support the arts and arts programs and what we're doing, you can definitely do that. Our website is susonc.org. We also have a support group that is online. So again, even though we're not here in Michigan, you can also, follow us online as well, and maybe even engage in some of our supports that are online. And lastly, that's my information. If anybody wants to contact me, I always like to be very open with that. I know that what I share can be triggering, and sometimes you have questions that you don't want to ask in the question and answer, but you do want to have another conversation with me at a later time. I am very open to that. This is my email. Take a picture of it. You can feel free to contact me directly, and I will gladly have some ongoing conversations with any of you. Again, Miss Julia Smith, thank you so much for inviting me here and having me here. And thank you, students, for listening and being a part of this important conversation. I hope you're inspired to stand up and speak out. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, I don't know if we have a couple of quick questions. I think we'll be open to
Sure.
a couple of questions before we close. I also want to remind folks that the Center for Counseling and Wellness has several groups, including one that is for female survivors of abuse. So spread the word for anybody you know that needs that. And there is the Safer Spaces policy that Calvin College has. You can go and find safer spaces on our website and report any kind of abuse and harassment, and that will be treated professionally and thoroughly. And given the time, if anyone just wants to raise a hand and ask the question, we'll take one or two questions and then we'll.
Yes. Absolutely. So we have started having some conversations around men. We do recognize that men are abused as well. And so one of the things that we are trying to do is just figure out some strategies around how to engage men. One thing is, having a support group for men is beneficial, but getting men to come out to a support group is the challenge. So we actually are in the process of this month, we're going to do a panel discussion, which will be something that any of you will be able to take part in and see. It will be a Facebook Live on April the 25th, and it will be with 3 male panelists who are actually victims of sexual abuse. And so that's kind of our strategy to start, is to kind of start that conversation in a way that we can at least see what the response will be, and if we can get men, even privately, to have conversations with us. The other thing that we're doing, which I have offered as a strategy here on campus, is to use even conference calls. So that's something we're going to look at as well, because that way you can call in and you can be anonymous the whole time, but still be able to get that support that you need. But we at Stand Up Speak Out definitely know that women are not the only ones who abuse, and that men are abused as well. And so we are slowly moving into that, where we will offer programs and support for men that are victims. Absolutely. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Sure. So her question was, on college campuses, a lot of times the person who has been victimized may be friends, or they're friends with other people. This person may be popular on campus, and it may be mutual friendships happening. So the fear is, how do you work through that fear, or getting over that anxiety of reporting when maybe this is a popular individual on campus, or mutual friendships. One of the things that, again, I say is being in a support setting with other people around you, again, is really beneficial. Being able to talk through that, of the fear that you feel, and being able to have some support around you to say, we're with you, we stand with you, we'll help you through this process. Because again, what you don't want to do is stop your healing journey while this individual continues to live free and potentially do this to someone else. So being able to get around individuals that you trust and that can support you in a support setting, I would say, is one way of being able to help you to or help an individual overcome that anxiety and fear. Yep. One more?
Have you been able to rebuild your relationship with the church at all?
I have. So I shared earlier in Professor Marr's class that one person had asked me about my relationship with God and church. And ironically, when I started speaking and sharing my poems once my book was published, I was invited to churches all the time. It was the church that, yes, come here, can you speak at my church, can you speak at my church? So I was able to rebuild my relationship within the church, because a lot of my speaking engagements happened in the church setting. And so that kind of fear that I felt around being in a church setting, I got over that, as well as I rebuilt my relationship spiritually, because that was also a part of my healing journey. So yes, churches support the work that I do, and I have very much reconnected with the church. Thank you for asking that question. Someone asked that question earlier in class, so that's a really good one. All right, thank you so much again. Thank you.